The night highway drowned in the rain. Heavy drops hammered against the asphalt, shining under the headlights like silver sparks. In the distance stood a bright red sports car on the roadside, its hood raised, the engine lifeless, like a heart that had stopped beating. Inside, Howard Lancaster, a billionaire, slammed his hand against the steering wheel. His face was tight with rage and frustration. Everything he had built, his entire reputation, and now his proud invention, the engine of the future, betrayed him in the middle of a deserted road. The headlights of an old pickup sliced through the fog. It slowed down and out stepped a tall, lean man in a worn jacket. His boots soaked instantly, but he walked forward with calm determination. "Looks like you've got a problem," he said over the roar of the rain. Howard turned his head. His tailored suit, his watch, worth more than that entire pickup, screamed wealth. His cold eyes narrowed. "No. You've got a problem if you don't back off. I'm a mechanic. Maybe I can help." Howard let out a bitter laugh. "You? Do you even know what kind of engine this is? It's my own design. Someone like you wouldn't even get near it." But the stranger didn't flinch. He stepped closer. A lightning bolt ripped the sky, illuminating the scene. The red sports car, the furious billionaire, and the soaked mechanic standing face to face. Jamal bent over the hood, listening. Through the pounding rain, he caught a strange, uneven rhythm inside the system. His lips moved almost inaudibly. "Your cooling circuit is overheating. If you don't release the pressure, the motor will fail completely." "Don't lecture me!" Howard snapped. At that exact moment, the engine coughed, sputtered, and went dead. Silence. Only the rain and the distant hum of passing cars. Howard froze, pale. His creation, his pride, dead. Jamal straightened and calmly extended his hand. "Let me try." And that was the moment two worlds collided. Arrogant luxury and humble mastery. And from that second on, their fates became bound together. Morning in the poor neighborhood began slowly. Narrow streets were littered with trash and puddles. Old houses with peeling paint stood shoulder to shoulder like tired old men. But from the corner garage came the sound of metal clanging and the rhythmic turn of a wrench. Jamal, a tall, lean young man with weary eyes and strong hands, worked without paying attention to passers-by. His work clothes were stained with oil, but every movement was precise and confident. On the workbench lay the dismantled engine of an old pickup. Others would have said, "It's junk. The metal is dead." But Jamal never gave up. "Come on, old friend, breathe again," he muttered, lifting another part. Some neighborhood boys stopped at the door. "Hey, Jamal, who even needs your wrecks? People buy new cars, not this trash." One laughed. The others joined in, but Jamal only shrugged. "New cars cost money. I bring life back to the old ones. That's an art, too." When the engine roared to life, the garage filled with the smell of gasoline. Jamal smiled. Another small victory. That evening, he returned home. Their house was tiny. Cracked walls, old furniture that creaked with every move. His mother, worn down by illness, sat by the window wrapped in a woolen blanket. Her face was tired, but her smile was warm. Layla, his teenage sister with big eyes, greeted him with a hug. "Jamal, I got a letter from college. If only we could pay for it." He pulled her close, hiding the pain in his own eyes. "You'll go. I'll find a way." But deep down he knew. The money barely covered his mother's medicine and food. Each day was a battle. One evening, as they sat at dinner, the old TV flickered with static before showing a live broadcast. A hall glittered with lights, applause filled the room. On stage stood Howard Lancaster, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, a face everyone knew. He was presenting the new engine of his corporation. "The future of transportation," read the banner below. Howard's voice was loud and confident. "This engine will change everything. It's a step into a new era. But, let's be honest, ordinary mechanics will never understand these technologies. They'll keep tinkering with rusted metal. The future belongs to those who think big, like us." The hall erupted with laughter and applause. Howard looked into the camera with the gaze of a victor. Jamal froze, his hands, still greasy with oil, clenched into fists. A spark flashed in his eyes. Not anger, but defiance. "You do understand this better than he thinks, don't you?" Layla asked softly. Jamal didn't answer. He only turned to the window. Inside him, determination was growing, though he couldn't yet put it into words. The following days dragged on. Jamal worked, helped neighbors, fixed children's bikes, but Howard's words echoed in his head. Ordinary mechanics will never understand. And then fate made its move. One rainy evening, Jamal drove home in his old pickup. Headlights cut through the fog, wipers struggled against the torrent of rain. Suddenly, a gleam ahead caught his eye. A red sports car stood on the roadside, hood raised. The machine looked as if it had rolled off a magazine cover. Rain poured down its polished body like mud, staining a luxury suit. Jamal slowed down. His heart told him to stop. Inside, behind the wheel, sat Howard, his face twisted with frustration. He pounded the steering wheel as if he could force the machine to obey. Jamal stepped out of his pickup. His jacket was instantly soaked, his boots splashed in puddles. But he walked closer. "Having trouble?" he asked. Howard looked up, his gaze full of fatigue and arrogance. "No, you'll have trouble if you don't get lost. I'm a mechanic. Maybe I can help." "Come." Howard smirked, but it was a cruel smirk. "You even know what kind of engine this is? It's my own design. Someone like you wouldn't understand it even in a dream." Jamal didn't step back. He leaned toward the hood. Thunder tore the sky, lighting the scene. Two men, two worlds, poverty and luxury. He listened carefully, catching the uneven rhythm beneath the roar of the rain. "Your system is overheating. If you don't release the pressure, the motor will shut down completely." "Don't lecture me," Howard shouted. And as if to prove Jamal right, the engine coughed and died completely. Silence, only rain and the occasional sound of cars in the distance. Howard paled. His invention, his pride, dead. Jamal straightened up and calmly held out his hand. "Let me try." That moment marked the beginning of a story that would change them both. Rain kept pouring down, relentless, drumming against the metal. Jamal leaned over the engine, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who knew machines by heart. He was used to rusty bolts and broken carburetors. Yet here he was, inside the guts of a high-tech prototype that the richest man in the state claimed only he could understand. Howard stood a step away, arms crossed, his soaked suit clinging to him. He hated the sight of this street mechanic touching his pride and glory. "You think you can grasp what's in front of you?" Howard said coldly. Jamal didn't lift his eyes. His fingers brushed a valve, listening to the faint vibration. "Sometimes you don't need to grasp. You just need to listen. Machines speak if you let them." He turned the wrench gently. The engine gave a low, even sound, steadier than before. Howard's brows furrowed. "What did you just do?" "Released excess pressure. Heat was building in the wrong place. If you leave it, it kills itself." Howard shook his head. "Impossible. My engineers checked everything 100 times. Jamal allowed himself the faintest smile. "Maybe they read the formulas." "I listened to the heartbeat." He twisted the key. At first, silence. Then the engine roared, smooth and powerful, a thunder rolling across the rain. Howard froze. The impossible had just happened. A stranger from the slums had restored what his entire team of specialists couldn't. "Damn," Howard whispered, almost to himself. Jamal closed the hood, wiped his hands on his wet jacket. "You'll make it to the city now, but you should rethink your cooling system." He turned toward his pickup. "Wait!" Howard's voice cracked through the rain. Jamal stopped, glancing back. For the first time, Howard's eyes didn't carry arrogance, but something else, confusion. "How much do you want? For what?" "For fixing it. For helping me." "I didn't stop for money," Jamal replied quietly. "I love machines." Howard stared at him, shaken. Everyone wanted something from him. Money, power, a favor. But this man wanted nothing. "What's your name?" "Jamal." Howard looked at the car, then at him. "You want to see how the future is built?" Days later, Jamal stepped inside Lancaster Corporation's headquarters. Vast halls gleamed with sterile light, filled with spotless white coats and humming screens. Jamal's worn jacket and oil-stained hands drew stares and smirks. That's him? The mechanic who Saved the engine? He'll be gone soon. Doesn't belong here. Howard brought him to the prototype. The machine stood gleaming under the lights, surrounded by monitors. Take a look, Howard said. This is what will change the world. Maybe you'll notice what others missed. Jamal approached slowly. His heart beat faster. He felt like a child being handed the secrets of the universe. But behind him, whispers lingered. He'll mess up. Then we'll see his true place. The camera lingered on the director's cold face, eyes sharp as knives. He looked at Jamal with pure calculation, a silent promise. You don't belong here, and I'll make sure you fall. Jamal bent over the engine, fingertips brushing its surface, and then he noticed something that made his eyes widen. The laboratory glowed with white light, its walls lined with monitors and graphs. Engineers moved like bees, their faces stern, their coats spotless. Jamal stood by the prototype, clutching his small notebook. He could feel their eyes on him, mocking, dismissive. Go on then, street genius, one engineer sneered. Show us your miracle. Howard stood at a distance, arms crossed. His face was unreadable, but his eyes followed every move Jamal made. Jamal bent over the engine. He closed his eyes, listening. His fingers brushed the surface of the casing. There it was again. The uneven rhythm, a whisper of imbalance. There's an error in the cooling system, he said softly. Laughter echoed around the lab. Do you hear yourselves? Another engineer jeered. We've been working on this for 2 years. Do you really think you spotted something we missed? Jamal didn't argue. He reached for a wrench and turned a valve. The monitors immediately showed a shift. The temperature graph dropped. Engineers exchanged uneasy glances. Howard stepped forward. Explain. You're forcing too much heat into one chamber. It builds pressure. I diverted it. Now, the flow is balanced. Balanced? By listening? The engineer scoffed. We use mathematics, and he uses his ears. Laughter again. But the monitors didn't lie. The line had stabilized. Howard's expression didn't change, but a spark flickered in his eyes. The next day, Jamal returned. The hostility was worse. Engineers bumped him in the hallway, muttered insults under their breath. He won't last. He's a trick. He'll ruin everything. But worse was happening upstairs. In the boardroom, the gray-haired director leaned over the table. His voice was calm, but it carried steel. This boy is a threat. Lancaster's blinded by him. If he rises, investors will rally around a fairy tale, a mechanic from the slums saving the future. We can't allow it. One director asked nervously, What do you suggest? We make him fall. A mistake, a forged trail. And Lancaster will see he put his trust in the wrong hands. That evening, Jamal stayed late in the lab. The white lights hummed, casting long shadows. He traced his fingers across the engine's body, thinking. And then, he saw it. Hidden under layers of components was a small element, one that didn't fit the logic of the design. He examined it closer, his eyes narrowing. The part was unstable, a fault disguised in plain sight. If this runs at full capacity, he whispered, it could explode. His pulse quickened. He had just uncovered something that could destroy not only the engine, but lives. And then a voice cut through the silence. Well. Found something interesting, did you? Jamal spun around. In the doorway stood the gray-haired director. The harsh lab light carved lines across his face, his eyes glittering cold. You're meddling with things you don't understand, the director said softly. And that is dangerous. The camera closed in on Jamal's face, a mix of fear and determination. He knew this was no longer about machines. It was war. The night stretched endlessly in the laboratory. Jamal sat in front of the engine with his notebook open, sketches scattered across the page. His eyes burned with intensity. He had found something no one wanted to admit, a flaw so dangerous it could destroy the entire project. That small hidden component pulsed in his mind. It didn't belong. It was a ticking time bomb. If they don't fix this, the engine will tear itself apart, he whispered. The next morning, Jamal knocked on the door of Howard's office. The billionaire sat behind a vast desk, drowning in charts and glowing screens. His face looked worn, but proud as ever. I need to talk to you, Jamal said, placing the notebook down. Howard barely looked up. What is it? I found an error. This piece here, Jamal pointed at his notes, is unstable. If you push the engine to its limit, it could explode. Howard's eyes narrowed. You're accusing my engineers of incompetence? No, but sometimes a fresh pair of eyes sees what others miss. So you think you know better than them? The silence grew heavy. Jamal tried to explain further, but the door opened. The gray-haired director entered holding a tablet. He walked straight to the desk, picked up the notebook, and flipped through the pages. How sweet, the director said with a thin smile. Our street mechanic is rewriting our designs now? Howard frowned. I'll handle this. Of course, the director replied smoothly. But let me remind you, Lancaster, this boy doesn't belong here. His ideas could be dangerous. He set the notebook down, his cold eyes locking with Jamal's. The message was clear. You're playing with fire. Later that day, Jamal was summoned to the lab. Engineers surrounded him, projecting charts on the screen. Are these your calculations? One demanded. Yes. Well, look at this. According to your model, the system collapses. On the screen, the graphs indeed showed failure. Jamal's stomach sank. He recognized immediately. The numbers were falsified. That's not what I calculated, he said firmly. Of course it isn't, the engineer sneered. You just don't understand the scale. We're dealing with advanced mathematics, not hunches and listening. They laughed, patting each other on the back. One leaned closer and whispered just loud enough, You'll embarrass yourself soon. That's the plan. Jamal clenched his fists but said nothing. In the corridor afterward, he nearly collided with Howard. Desperation broke through his calm facade. They're framing me. You have to believe me. The flaw is real. Howard looked at him for a long moment. His voice came out cold. Sometimes it's better to stay in the world where you're strong. Maybe this place isn't for you. The words hit harder than any insult. That evening, at home, Layla ran to greet him with excitement. How was it? You're working with Lancaster himself now. Jamal forced a smile. He couldn't crush her hope, but his mother, watching silently, saw the truth in his eyes. They've turned against you, she said softly. But listen to me. When the whole world pushes you down, that's when you have to believe in yourself the most. Jamal sat quietly for a long time, then nodded. I won't stop. Not now. In the lab that night, unseen hands tampered with the system logs. On the glowing screen, a new entry appeared. Access attempt. Jamal H. The laboratory buzzed like a hive. Engineers rushed between consoles, preparing the prototype for another trial. Jamal stood off to the side, clutching his notebook, tension written all over his face. He still believed he could prove the flaw was real, that Howard would finally see the truth. Then, a sharp voice cut through the noise. Stop all operations. The gray-haired director strode in, his tablet in hand. Behind him marched two men from corporate security. His calm, icy expression carried weight. We have detected tampering in the system. Someone attempted to alter the cooling parameters to trigger an overload. If the engine had been tested in that condition, the result would have been catastrophic. A wave of whispers filled the room. Eyes turned toward Jamal. And most importantly, the director continued, tapping his tablet, the access logs point to one account, Jamal H. Gasps. Engineers exchanged knowing looks, some smirking, others shaking their heads. I knew it, someone muttered. The kid's dangerous. Jamal stepped forward, voice firm. That's a lie. I never touched the system like that. Someone faked it. Oh, really? The director said smoothly, holding the tablet high. How do you explain your name in the logs, then? At that moment, Howard entered. His face was grave, unreadable. He looked at Jamal, and the disappointment in his eyes struck harder than any words. You let me down, he said quietly. No! Jamal's voice rose. This is a setup. Someone... Enough, Howard snapped. He turned to security. Escort him out. The guards gripped Jamal by the arms. He tried to resist, but it was useless. As they dragged him through the hallway, engineers smirked, whispering. One leaned close enough to hiss, Back to your junkyard, street boy. Rain pounded the pavement as they shoved him outside the gates. Jamal stood alone, soaked, fury burning in his chest. His voice trembled, but was steady. They framed me. At home, his mother's eyes searched his face. What did they do? She asked softly. Jamal sank onto a chair, burying his face in his hands. They accused me of trying to destroy the engine. All I wanted was to save them from disaster. His mother placed a frail hand on his shoulder. People fear those who remind them of their weakness. But you know the truth, and truth will outlast their lies. Layla sat beside him, her voice trembling but determined. If you saw the danger, then you have to fight, even if they're all against you. Jamal lifted his head slowly, his fists clenched. I won't let them win. I'll fight. Meanwhile, in the boardroom, the director addressed the other members of the council. He's gone, but we must ensure he doesn't come back. If he speaks out, we'll have problems. What about Lancaster? No one asked. He trusts the system. He'll never side with the mechanic again. That night, Jamal sat alone in his garage, surrounded by scraps of old engines. His mind wasn't on the rusted parts, but on the prototype, the unstable component, the ticking danger. He touched the cold steel of an old motor and whispered, I'll find a way, even if I have to fight alone. Meanwhile, back in the lab, preparations for a new test continued. The monitors lit up as the prototype powered on. Engineers exchanged uneasy glances as the red line on the temperature graph began to climb. The great testing hall of Lancaster Corporation glowed with spotlights. Rows of investors, journalists, and partners filled the seats, eyes fixed on the gleaming prototype at the center. Huge screens displayed live graphs of temperature, pressure, and stability. This was supposed to be the triumphant moment. Howard stood on the stage in his immaculate suit, his face carved into confidence. Yet deep inside, a shadow lingered. In his mind, he heard Jamal's quiet warning, if you don't change the system, the engine will destroy itself. Today, Howard declared, you will witness the future. The hall erupted in applause. Technicians activated the system. The engine rumbled to life, its roar vibrating through the vast hall. At first, everything seemed flawless. The green bars on the monitors stayed steady. Applause and murmurs of approval filled the air. See, one director whispered smugly. Perfect. But within minutes, the lines began to tremble. The red bar for temperature crept upward. Warning signals blinked. It's just a spike, said the lead engineer, forcing confidence into his voice. But sweat beaded on his forehead. The numbers kept climbing. The hum of the engine shifted into a strained whine. The hall grew tense. Howard's jaw tightened. What's happening? Overload in the cooling circuit, a technician shouted. We're losing control. Panic rippled through the audience. The massive screens now flashed with red alerts. The smell of hot metal and ozone filled the air. Journalists scrambled, cameras flashing wildly. Howard's heart pounded. Jamal's voice echoed again in his head. It will explode. Shut it down, Howard barked. We can't. The system isn't responding. The engine howled as if tearing itself apart. Sparks showered from the frame, metal vibrating under the strain. People in the audience screamed, rushing for the exits. Finally, the emergency failsafe engaged. With a deafening screech, the engine shuddered and fell silent. Smoke curled into the air. For a moment, all was still. The silence was crushing. Then came the chaos. Reporters shouting, investors arguing, engineers pale with shock. The demonstration had ended in disaster. The gray-haired director rushed to Howard's side. We'll call it a technical glitch, he whispered. We can spin this. But Howard barely heard him. His eyes had fixed on a memory. Jamal, soaked in rain, calmly pointing out the flaw no one else would admit. That night, alone in his office, Howard stared at Jamal's notebook. Pages of simple sketches and pencil marks spoke louder than the engineer's complex formulas. His pride resisted, but truth gnawed at him. He was right, Howard muttered, closing his eyes. God help me, he was right. He picked up the phone and dialed. Jamal sat in his dim garage, surrounded by scraps of rust and grease. His phone buzzed. He frowned at the unfamiliar number, then answered. "This is Howard Lancaster," came the voice on the other end. Jamal's chest tightened. "What do you want?" "You were right. The engine nearly blew apart today. I need you. Only you saw the flaw." Jamal's silence stretched. Finally, he said, "Why should I trust you now?" "Because if we don't fix this, people will die." Jamal's hand clenched around the phone. His eyes burned with determination. "If I come back, it's as your equal, not your servant." A pause, then Howard said, "Agreed." Jamal sat in his dim garage, oil-stained hands resting on the workbench, when his phone buzzed again. He wiped his palms on his jacket and checked the screen. The same unknown number glowed. He hesitated, then answered. "This is Howard Lancaster," the voice repeated, firmer this time. Jamal's heart jumped, but his reply was cold. "I already know who you are. Why are you calling me again?" "I told you yesterday, Jamal," Howard said. His voice carried something Jamal had never heard before. Humility. "You were right. Without you, the engine would have destroyed itself. I need your help. Come back." Jamal stared at the rusted tools on his table, memories of humiliation and mockery flashing before his eyes. The sneers, the laughter, the dismissal. "You threw me out. You told me I didn't belong." "I was wrong," Howard admitted, almost choking on the words. "I've been wrong about many things, but I can't fix this without you." Jamal closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "If I return, I'm not a pawn. You'll listen to me as an equal." On the other end of the line, silence. Then Howard said quietly but firmly, "Agreed." When Jamal walked back into the corporation's towering building, the air grew thick with whispers. Engineers stopped what they were doing, their eyes filled with scorn and disbelief. "He's back? After what happened? Impossible. Let him try. He won't last." Howard waited by the elevator. His once arrogant posture was gone, replaced by something heavier, a burden. He extended a hand. "Welcome back." Jamal didn't take it at first, but nodded. Then, "Let's get to work." Meanwhile, in the boardroom, the council erupted in anger. The gray-haired director slammed his fist on the table. "He brought him back. I warned you all, the boy's dangerous." One of the council members frowned. "And if Lancaster trusts him, the press will turn him into a savior. Imagine the headlines. Street mechanic saves billionaire's dream. Investors will side with him. We'll lose everything." "Then we destroy them both," the director hissed. His eyes narrowed, icy and merciless. "If Lancaster wants to protect him, he can fall with him." Dash. In the lab, Jamal and Howard stood side by side before the prototype. For the first time, they weren't adversaries. Jamal traced the engine's surface, listening. His voice was calm but steady. "Your design traps heat in loops. We need a new cooling configuration, redirecting pressure into multiple channels. Only then will it hold." Howard leaned closer, studying him. For the first time, he wasn't looking at Jamal like a subordinate, but like a man holding a key. "You remind me of myself," Howard said quietly. "Before the money, before the pride." Jamal looked him in the eye. "Then maybe it's not too late to remember who you are." In the shadowed hallway outside, the gray-haired director stood, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was a venomous whisper. "Begin the operation. Make sure that mechanic doesn't live to see the next test." Night fell heavy over the city, but the laboratory of Lancaster Corporation still glowed under sterile white lights. Most workers had gone home. Only Jamal remained, hunched over the engine, diagrams spread across the table. His hands moved tirelessly, adjusting, sketching, listening. Howard entered briefly, watching him from the doorway. "You work like the engine is alive," Howard said softly. "To me, it is alive," Jamal replied, not lifting his head. "Every machine has a rhythm. You just have to listen." When Howard finally left, silence returned. Jamal was alone, or so he thought. A faint metallic scrape echoed through the lab. The hair on the back of his neck rose. He looked up. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the hum of the lights. He bent back over the engine, and suddenly a bolt snapped loose under his hand. A heavy panel nearly crushed his foot. Jamal jumped back, his pulse racing. He examined the bolt and froze. It had been carefully filed down. "This wasn't an accident," he whispered. The next morning, driving his pickup to work, Jamal noticed a black sedan in his mirror. It had been behind him for too long, taking every turn he made. His hands gripped the wheel tighter. He swerved into a narrow alley, braked sharply, and looked out. The sedan passed slowly, the driver turning his head. Their eyes locked for a split second. Cold, threatening. Then the car rolled on. When Jamal reached the building, Howard noticed his pale face. "What happened?" "Someone's following me, and last night they sabotaged the lab. Someone wants me gone." "Are you sure?" "More than sure." Howard's jaw clenched. "I know who's behind this. The board fears you. But now, they'll have to deal with me as well." In the council chamber, the gray-haired director spoke calmly, but every word cut like ice. The attempt failed. He's still alive. But if we allow him to rise, the media will crown him a hero. A mechanic who saved the future? Investors would side with him, not us. We cannot allow it. "What do we do then?" another member asked. "We'll paint him as a spy, plant documents, prove he's working for our rivals. Lancaster himself will have no choice but to cast him out." Later in the lab, an engineer approached Jamal with a mocking smile. "Listen, street boy, walk away. You don't know what you've stepped into." "I'm not leaving," Jamal said firmly. "Then they'll throw you out, and it'll hurt more than you can imagine." He tossed a folder onto the table and walked away. Jamal opened it. Inside were papers, contracts, supposed evidence that he'd sold company secrets to competitors. The forgeries were neat, convincing. "They want to bury me," Jamal muttered. That night at home, his mother saw the storm in his eyes. "You're exhausted. Maybe it's time to stop." But Jamal shook his head. "If I leave, they'll finish this engine as it is, and people will get hurt. I can't allow that." Layla looked at him with fear. "They could hurt you." "I don't fear for myself," Jamal said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I fear for all of us. That's why I have to keep going." In the shadows of the boardroom, Howard confronted the directors the next morning. His voice was sharp, his eyes burning. "I know you're trying to destroy Jamal, but hear me now. If you stand against him, you stand against me." The gray-haired director smiled coldly. "Then be ready to fall with him." The corporate conference hall was packed. Engineers, executives, journalists. Everyone had gathered for an official announcement. The air buzzed with tension like a storm waiting to break. The gray-haired director stood at the podium, voice smooth and commanding. "We have gathered here today because our project faces a grave threat. We have uncovered undeniable proof of espionage within our ranks." Gasps rippled across the room. Reporters leaned forward, cameras flashing. He lifted a folder dramatically. "These documents show clearly that Jamal H., a so-called mechanic, has been leaking our designs to competitors. Here are the dates, the signatures, the login records. He tried to destroy this company from within." The crowd erupted in whispers. Dozens of eyes fixed on Jamal, seated in the front row. Jamal rose to his feet. His voice was steady, but his chest burned. "That's a lie. They planted those papers. I've never worked for anyone but myself." Reporters shouted over each other. "Jamal, did you pass secrets to competitors? Why do the logs show your name? Who would frame you and why?" Jamal raised his voice over the noise. "I'm here because I want the engine to be safe. But they..." He pointed toward the directors. "They're afraid. Afraid a street mechanic could see what they couldn't." Howard sat at the council table, silent, his hand resting on Jamal's notebook. His expression was unreadable. The room buzzed louder and louder until Howard finally stood. His voice sliced through the uproar. "Enough." Everyone fell silent. Howard turned toward the crowd. "I've seen these so-called documents. And I've seen what Jamal can do. His calculations saved us from catastrophe. Without him, our engine would already be nothing but twisted metal." Murmurs filled the hall. Journalists scribbled furiously. "You mean you believe him?" the director demanded, his voice sharp. "Yes," Howard replied. His tone was firm, clear. "I believe him more than I believe anyone sitting here, clinging to their pride." The room exploded into argument. Executives shouted, engineers protested, journalists barked questions. Some clapped, others jeered. The director raised his hand and signaled. Suddenly, the screens behind him lit up, displaying more evidence. Charts, signatures, login attempts. To the untrained eye, it looked damning. "He's a spy," the director roared. "Here's the proof." The noise swelled again until the doors at the back burst open. A young analyst stumbled in, clutching a USB drive. His face was pale, his hands shook. "Stop! It's all fake. I was forced to alter the data." The room froze. Reporters surged toward him, shouting questions. Howard stepped forward. "Who forced you?" The analyst's voice trembled, but he pointed straight at the director. "Him and his men. They made me forge everything. Jamal is innocent." The room erupted. Journalists screamed questions, cameras flashed like lightning. Executives turned on each other. The director tried to shout them down. "Lies! This is a conspiracy against me." But just then, the screen shifted again, showing surveillance footage from the lab. The image was grainy but clear. A dark figure attacking Jamal with a steel bar. A flash of light revealed the attacker's face, one of the director's engineers. The hall fell silent. Howard's voice thundered. "There are your proofs. They tried to kill him. They tried to silence the truth." Security rushed in. The director was pale but defiant, his voice dripping venom as they dragged him away. "You think you've won? This is only the beginning. The world doesn't belong to mechanics. It belongs to those willing to crush them underfoot." As the doors closed behind him, Jamal stood motionless. His heart pounded, but his face was calm. For the first time, the world was starting to see the truth. Night blanketed the city, but inside the Lancaster Corporation's laboratory, light still poured from the ceiling panels. The building was nearly empty. Jamal stayed behind, alone, bent over the prototype with sketches scattered across the workbench. His hands were blackened with grease, his eyes bloodshot with exhaustion, but he worked relentlessly. The silence pressed in on him, until a faint metallic scrape echoed through the room. Jamal froze. Slowly, he raised his head. "Who's there?" No answer. He turned back to the engine, and in that instant, a heavy metal panel came crashing down. Jamal jumped back, his heart pounding. He examined the bolts that had given way. They had been deliberately filed down. "This isn't an accident," he whispered. The lights flickered once, then went out. The lab plunged into darkness, the only glow coming from the monitors. A shadow moved quickly, and suddenly a steel bar whistled through the air, slamming into the table where Jamal had been standing a second earlier. Sparks flew. "You should have stayed away," a voice growled from the shadows. Jamal grabbed the closest thing at hand, a heavy wrench. His palms sweated, but his grip was firm. "If you think I'm giving up, you're wrong." The figure lunged again. Metal clashed on metal, the wrench colliding with the bar. The sound rang out in the dark. Jamal staggered under the blows, barely holding his ground. His lungs burned with every breath. Suddenly, the lab door burst open. Light flooded in, and Howard's voice roared, "Stop!" The attacker froze. The light revealed his face. One of the corporation's own engineers, a loyal man to the director. His eyes were wild with desperation. "He's ruining everything!" the man shouted. "Hey, he's a threat. Without him, the project stays ours." Howard stepped forward, his gaze like steel. "If you strike him again, you'll have to strike me too." The engineer trembled. A beat of silence hung heavy. Then, with a frustrated snarl, he dropped the bar and bolted out of the room. Howard rushed to Jamal's side. "Are you hurt?" Jamal was breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face. "I'm fine. But this proves it. They're desperate enough to kill me." Howard clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "Then tomorrow, we go on the offensive. They've underestimated us for the last time." The next morning, Newspapers screamed about the failed test. Lancaster's dream in ruins. Revolutionary engine on the brink of collapse. Beneath the headlines, photographs of Jamal appeared alongside Howard's. Some stories asked, "Street mechanic saves billionaire's project?" Others questioned, "Sabotage or savior?" Outside the corporation's headquarters, reporters crowded the entrance, flashes going off like lightning. Inside, the atmosphere was darker still. The council of directors gathered again. The gray-haired director leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. "We failed to eliminate him quietly. Then we'll do it publicly. At the next meeting, we'll finish both of them." His colleagues nodded grimly. That afternoon, Jamal and Howard entered the Grand Council Hall together. Doors slammed shut behind them. In the shadows of the room, their enemies were already waiting. The Grand Council Hall glowed with harsh white lights. At the center stood the long, polished table, surrounded by directors, engineers, and reporters invited to witness the meeting. The air felt electric, thick with expectation. Howard and Jamal entered side by side. A murmur rippled through the room. Some stared in shock, others in contempt, and still others with quiet fascination. The gray-haired director rose slowly, his eyes glinting like cold steel. His voice was smooth, confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we move forward, there is a matter of betrayal. Our systems recorded another breach last night, another attempt to steal our data. And once again, the trail leads back to one man, Jamal." Gasps. Cameras clicked furiously. Jamal stood abruptly, his voice carried through the chamber. "That's a lie. I was attacked last night in the lab. Someone tried to kill me." The director smirked. "And yet the logs don't lie. Your words against hard evidence, whom do you expect them to believe?" He turned toward Howard, his voice sharp as a blade. "Choose, Lancaster. Either you cut him loose, or you fall with him." The hall grew silent. All eyes turned to Howard. He clenched his jaw, the weight of the decision visible on his face. For a moment, doubt flickered. Then he stepped forward. "No," Howard said, his voice booming. "I choose him. I choose the truth." Shock rippled across the room. Journalists gasped. Directors shouted over each other. Engineers exchanged frantic looks. Howard continued, "This man saved us from catastrophe. He saw what none of you would admit. Without him, our great engine would be nothing but molten metal. Jamal is not our enemy. He is our salvation." The council erupted into chaos. Some shouted protests, others called for order. The gray-haired director raised a hand, signaling his allies. Suddenly, the screens behind him lit up. Charts, signatures, login records, all doctored to look like undeniable proof of Jamal's guilt. "There!" the director shouted. "Look at the evidence! He's a spy!" The uproar swelled. But then, the chamber doors burst open. A young analyst rushed inside, clutching a flash drive, his face pale with fear. "Stop!" he cried. His voice shook, but it carried. "It's fake! All of it! I was forced to alter the data." Reporters leapt to their feet, shoving microphones forward. "Who forced you?" Howard demanded. The analyst's trembling hand pointed directly at the director. "Him! He and his men! They made me forge the files. Jamal is innocent." Pandemonium erupted. Shouts filled the air. Journalists screamed questions. Engineers backed away in shock. The director's face went white, then hardened. "Lies! This is a conspiracy against me." But before he could say more, the screens flickered again. Security footage from the lab filled the monitors. Grainy but clear. A dark figure attacking Jamal with a steel bar. The light caught his face. One of the director's own loyal engineers. The hall froze. Silence descended like a blade. Howard's voice thundered, "There is your proof. They tried to kill him. They tried to silence the truth." Security stormed in. The director struggled as they seized him, spitting venom with his last words. "You think you've won? This is only the beginning. The world doesn't belong to mechanics. It belongs to men ruthless enough to seize it." He was dragged away, his words echoing through the chamber. Jamal stood rooted to the floor, his heart pounding. The eyes of the room were on him now, no longer filled with scorn, but with awe. For the first time, the world had begun to see him for who he really was. The hall had barely settled after the director was dragged away. Reporters were still shouting questions, cameras still flashing, but the tide had turned. For the first time, Jamal wasn't just a target of ridicule. He was the man who had revealed the truth. Howard placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. His voice was steady, but softer than ever before. You didn't just save the engine. You reminded me what it means to trust, to believe in something greater than pride. Jamal met his gaze. I never wanted glory. I just wanted the machine to be safe. For people to be safe. Those words spread quickly through the room, carried by journalists, pens, and cameras. A mechanic from the streets had stood against corruption and won. Weeks later in the laboratory, the engine roared again. This time, its systems were redesigned according to Jamal's notes. The monitors showed flawless stability. The red lines never spiked. The hall erupted in applause. Howard's smile was faint, but real. Perfect, he whispered. Jamal's family stood in the crowd. Layla clapping with tears in her eyes, their mother smiling through the weight of her illness. For the first time, they saw Jamal not just as a brother or a son, but as a man who had changed the course of their lives. At a press conference afterward, Howard stepped forward. His words echoed around the world. This project would have failed without Jamal. He taught me humility. He taught me vision. From this day forward, he is not just part of my team. He is my partner. Cameras flashed wildly. Headlines the next morning read, Street Mechanic Saves Billionaire's Dream. Back in his neighborhood, a new building opened, Jamal Engineering. It was more than a garage. It was a center for learning, for innovation. Children pressed against the windows, staring at engines on display. Layla walked inside proudly with her college acceptance letter in hand. Their mother stood at the doorway, whispering, You kept your promise, my son? The final scene cut to the open highway at dusk. The red sports car raced along the asphalt, its engine humming with flawless rhythm. Howard gripped the wheel. Jamal sat beside him. You changed me, Howard said quietly. And you changed my life, Jamal replied. They drove toward the glowing skyline. Two men from different worlds, bound now by respect. At home, Layla sat at a desk, writing in her journal. I will become a doctor. Because of my brother, I believe anything is possible. Over the image, Jamal's voice echoed softly. The world speaks to us. Machines, people, life itself. We only need to listen. The screen faded to black.